Uh, Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Jack Lifton, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about critical and strategic metals for the grid, which basically means to power our society. It's interesting to me that the scientists who study the development of humanity, as most of us know, it defined what they call the first three stages of civilization living together as the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. Unfortunately, most people think, well, then that was way in the past. The fact is, the Iron Age actually only came to an end during the American Civil War when the mass production of steel was introduced by Bessemer and others. And from then on, the use of steel exploded in our society. And quite frankly, we're still in the Iron Age, only it's steel. Uh, However, lately, in the last 20 or 25 years, we've entered a new age, the age of technology metals. These are the metals, the electronic and electrical properties of which make our technology society possible. The key metal for energy production and storage, distribution and use is of course copper. And I want to cite a statistic here that should interest all of you. 20 years ago, the United States, with 5% of the world's population, used about 20% of the world's copper. Of course, we were wiring like crazy, as you may remember from the dot-com era. Today, 20 years later, China, with 20% of the world's population, uses 50% of the world's copper. What's going on? China's catching up. In the last 25 years, China has produced as much steel or more than the United States its entire history. China has consumed more copper than all of the rest of the world combined. As China develops and continues to develop, this demand for copper is going to continue. The United States today imports 1/3 of our need for copper. That's amazing to me because the United States was always self-sufficient until sometime after the Chinese began consuming copper. Now we actually have to import copper, even though we have excellent deposits in the United States. And of course, no new ones have been developed because of environmental resistance. I'm not going to say environmental concerns because they're not real. It's the resistance that's important. Now let's talk about the metals lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese. Why am I saying these in the same sentence? Because these are the metals from which lithium-ion batteries are constructed. Now, in which of those materials is the United States self-sufficient? None. Now, isn't that interesting? The United States last year produced 500 tons of cobalt. That means you could make, that was 500,000 kilograms. Yeah, divide that by 10 because an average Tesla car today uses 10 kilograms of cobalt in its battery. And you get the fact the United States produced enough cobalt domestically to produce 50,000 Tesla cars. The United States last year sold, there were 17 million cars sold, and even 500,000 electric cars. So where did the raw materials come from? They came from everywhere else but the United States. We're minority suppliers, certainly of cobalt. We produce exactly 1/3 of 1% of the world's cobalt. We produce about 5% of the world's copper, 1 or 2% of the world's lithium, none of manganese today. And yet all of these materials are in abundance in North America. But what's kept them from being produced? I don't want to get into politics, but it's been environmentalism, very misplaced, because all we do when we virtue signal about not producing lithium from in California from the geothermal wells or in North Carolina from the spodumene deposits, when we say we can't do that because it's mining is dirty, all we mean is let the mining dirt be accumulated in China, Africa, other places, so we can feel good about it. And then, of course, we'll ignore that when we price these materials, and we'll say, well, we can't do it here because it's cheaper to produce it in China, where they don't capitalize any of these costs, environmental, safety, health. Okay, we are increasingly dependent on these technology metals, these formerly exotic metals, lithium, cobalt, manganese, nickel, and of course copper, for our societies, not only just growth, the maintenance of our society. So these can all be produced in North America. They can all be produced in Africa. Most of them produced, more than most of them, can be produced in South America, where the bulk of the world's lithium and copper comes from anyway. So if I don't like to give investment advice, but if you ask me, I will. And I'm telling you to take a hard look at North American opportunities to produce these grid metals, these metals for the storage, production, distribution, and use of electricity, because that's where the future is. We're in strong competition with China, and then India, and sooner or later, the billion people of Africa, for these same resources. Everyone needs to produce to develop their own societies. We certainly do in the United States. At the present time, our government seems to have discovered this, and they're promoting domestic self-sufficiency in these critical technology materials. Last week, the Department of Defense announced that next year's authorization bill for them will include almost $2 billion to purchase rare earth type services and products, providing they're produced domestically. Sorry about the phone. This is a wake-up call, but the Defense Department actually uses maybe 5 to 10% of these critical metals, if that. It's the consumer economy where these metals dominate, where the use of them dominates, and that consumer economy is huge. You can't make a car without copper. Today, you can't make a car without rare earths. You can't make a car without palladium, platinum, and rhodium. None of these materials is the United States self-sufficient, and yet just the American new car market is $500 billion a year. The American used car market is bigger than that. Just the automotive industry, the consumption of, for example, uses 10,000 tons of rare earths a year. How much of that is produced and refined in the United States? None. This situation obviously can only go on if we're allowed to do it by those who now control these exotic materials. So formerly exotic. We need to look to our own doorstep. We need to take a hard look at these companies that are producing these critical technology metals here or in allied countries. Canada, Australia, for example, are the best. And we need to do that now. So the automotive industry is perhaps, without us realizing it, the major consumer of grid metals. And I think what is really not understood here is that whether or not electric vehicles become predominant, or even a significant portion of those sold, the need for palladium in particular, platinum and rhodium, will never go away. All of these metals are in deficit. Palladium is produced in North America. The bulk of the world's palladium comes from Russia, and then some comes from South Africa, quite a bit from Canada, and the US is number 4 in production. But we don't produce enough at this point to take care of the cars we know we're going to make. Even if let's say electric cars are 50% of those sold in the year 2030, which is a very optimistic That would mean that between now and 2030, 100 million cars, of gasoline-powered cars, at least as much, maybe as many as 200 million, will be produced and sold in North America, every one of them requiring an emission exhaust catalytic converter, each of which has in it up to 4 or 5 grams, a sixth of an ounce of palladium. Please multiply that out by 100 million and 200 million, and think about what I'm saying. When the world's production of palladium today is about 300 tons a year, think about what's going on here. By the way, the production of rhodium, which is also required in new cars, each car with a gasoline engine, the production of new rhodium each year is 30 tons. 30 tons. Contrast that with gold at thousands of tons a year, silver, 20,000 tons a year. But rhodium, which is far more important to our society than gold, 30 tons a year. So think about it. Palladium, 300 tons a year. It's not enough. We have to find more sources. There's quite a bit of nickel and palladium and even cobalt in North America. We need to start producing it. We can't pretend anymore that there's not any here, that it's produced cheaper in Africa, produced, and the Chinese are doing all the work anyway. It's time for technology metals critical to the grid to be produced in sufficient quantity in the United States so that we don't have to worry about anybody else's problems or influence. Thanks.